Hi, and welcome to the Rare Business Podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm a consultant, advisor, researcher, and writer on all things related to customer service and customer experience. Through this podcast, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, and leading thinkers about what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees in this fast-moving modern age that we live in. If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then welcome, and please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsco.com, as I've now completed over 250 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then thank you for returning, and I'll aim to do a good enough job to keep you coming back week after week. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Mike Perk, who is CEO of WWC, a digital transformation advisory firm in Cape Town, South Africa. Hi, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Adrian. Yourself?
Very well. So, first thing that listeners will notice is you do not have a South African accent.
No.
So, before we get stuck into that, that's just kind of, tell us a bit about yourself and the work that you do, and how come you don't have a South African accent, but you're now based in Cape Town.
Wow, it's a long story. So, I was originally, obviously, from the UK. I'm from Kent, and I found my way across the water. My parents came from South Africa, and they moved to the UK in the mid-70s. My mum would bring kids up in apartheid South Africa, so that's how I ended up in England, really. And I found my way back. The journey I've taken to get to here was one of, I went to university. After university, I joined Marks and Spencer's, and I was part of their HR team and division.
Right.
And at the end of that, the last year, it was during the restructure in the 90s, and I spent a lot of my time traveling around and as part of the retrenchment process and talking to people that had worked at Marks and Spencer's for 30, 40 years, telling them, sorry, your job no longer exists. And this is restructuring. It's for the best of the company. And it was after a year of doing that. I don't know if anyone, have you ever seen the movie with George Clooney? And he flies around and he has to sort of trench people. Yeah. It felt a little bit like that, and it was scarring after a while for me. I learned a lot. I learned a hell of a lot about people and behavior and how organizations should treat their people. And I just needed a break. So then I came over to South Africa to learn to surf. And how
did that go?
It was actually pretty good. I did learn to surf, and I got pretty good at it. But I haven't surfed since I've had kids. So I've got 2 kids now. My oldest is 8. And I remember going for a day's long surf the day before my wife was due to go in for a C-section, because I knew that I wasn't going to be able to get out as often. And it's actually been now 8 years. 8 years since I've been back in the water.
Blimey.
So I know, and you've just reminded me about that now by asking that question. So now I feel like
sticking the knife in.
Yeah, I know. So I came over here and we started a business over here from then. I did come back to the UK for a bit. We picked up a few clients and then moved back here, and I've been here for 12 years now.
Fantastic. Now, we met actually at a recent conference in South Africa where we were both speaking, and funny enough, another kind of curiosity of our conversation is we found out they both have a love of Loke's shoes, which was brilliant. It's always great to find a fan of Loke's shoes. I think they're fabulous. People, if you haven't heard of Loke's shoes, you should check them out. Loakes, because they are beautiful handmade shoes, not so expensive, but they're very, very nice. Anyway, apart from
fantastic.
That,
well, on that, I think what didn't connect us was, and it should do, is the great talks that we were giving and the topics and the subjects. But actually, it came up to you and said, "I love your shoes."
Yeah, exactly.
And they love shoes. So we connected not based on work, but on a passion for handmade shoes.
Absolutely. And I thought was it was also quite random, but it was a bit like when I was talking about my shoes, and I think there was a hand that shot up at the back of the room and went, "Yeah, I like Loke shoes," and I was like, "There you go."
That's me. I'm the Imelda DeMarcos of my family.
Fantastic. So, but anyway, at the conference, and we were talking about both hopefully talking about some interesting stuff. I thought the stuff that you were talking about was particularly interesting because you talked about this thing called future fit leadership. So can you tell us about kind of what is that and why do leaders need to change the way that they lead their people, going forward?
Yeah, 100%. Well, actually, where it came from, where the term came from, there's a little bit of a history behind it. I was fortunate enough to have both my parents were very high tech. They've always been involved in that, in technology. Whether on my dad's side it was mechanical engineering, he was building drones. I think drones is something from nowadays. He was building drones in the mid 80s for the military of defense, little miniature things. I remember going as a kid to his workshop and seeing these small things. And my mum was a computer programmer in the 60s, funnily enough.
Right.
When ladies weren't allowed to program. So she had to train the men to program. So we always had these computers. So I've always been exposed to technology throughout my life. And I went and did SEO to earn a living when I was at university. And then I started this digital agency when I came to South Africa. And we grew that and we started something called The Heavy Chef. So I've always been around this technology. And it was about 2 years ago that we were finding that the marketing industry was changing quite dramatically. And a lot of what was happening with the clients that we were working with was that the relationship was turning more into a subservient one.
Right.
And I wasn't feeling like it was fulfilling the purpose that I wanted to fulfill in my life, which was helping people realize their potential. And that's sort of where it stemmed from. And what we started to do was look at, okay, what do we want to do? There's a lot of self-reflection, introspection, and we started to look at our clients and go, what is it that's changed in the relationship? And what have we learned over the last 15 years of running an agency, and beyond that, the time I was spending around technology? And a key thing was coming up for us about the adoption of technology. Everyone was passionate, and particularly now in this fast-moving world. Yeah. We talk a lot about digital transformation. We've got to change. Now, what has been the biggest blocker for organizations in this change? And we spend so much time focusing on the technology, focusing on we've got to get AI in our organizations. We've got to see how robotics can come in, or blockchain, or all these different things. Yeah. And organizations spending time and money on that, but it just wasn't landing.
Yes.
And it just wasn't working when it went in. Or if it was in such sporadic moments. So we looked at our experience with clients and we went, well, actually, what's happening here is it's the people. Yes. The people are the biggest blocker to this technology. And then we narrowed it in further and we went, okay, well, who is the biggest enabler or disabler of the people within the organization? And it was the leader. And it was the leadership teams. Yeah. And so then we went further and we looked at the research that Gemini had done, the people like MIT Sloan and Harvard Business Review, and everything was pointing to the same common factor. Now, I'm a big believer in the 80-20 rule. So Pareto's law that says you can focus on a lot of things, but if you can find the one thing that is going to make the biggest difference to make that change, focusing on that. I mean, we all know that 80% of our revenue comes from 20% of our customers. 80% of the work done in our organizations comes from 20% of the staff. So why not look at what is the 80% that is causing this block for this digital transformation in organizations and focus on the 20% that's causing that. And that is the leadership. So that's where the idea of future fit leadership came from. And we started to look at what are the patterns that we're seeing in successful leadership. Right. What are the key actions and attributes that the successful leaders across the globe, irrespective of industry, are showing? And is there things that we can learn from that? Okay. Are there things that we can take and we can start to adopt?
So that all sounds kind of great, and there's a lot of people kind of pointing, in that direction in terms of the, leadership has to kind of change, has to be less kind of command and control. It has to be more sort of enabling. It's almost like a 21st century version of, it's almost like servant leadership is becoming a proper, a widespread sort of practice, or getting widely adopted, as it were. But the interest, there's many people talking about different sort of variations of this. But I think that the thing that fascinated me, and I thought was a really clever thing to do, is that you brought this idea of this future fit leadership, and I know you're further developing this because you're writing a book about it, and it's coming out sort of latter part of next year. But you told a story about this and I also know that because you told us about this in your talk, is that you have a love of Second World War history, and but you use a film that most people will know, and if they don't know, you should go out and watch it, and Mike will tell you about it in a minute, is that they use the combined World War II history, a film which is based on a true story, as a way of bringing this whole future fit leadership thing to life. So there you go. I've teed you up now, Mike. You now have to tell us about that and the film, etc. And then I can hum away kind of the theme tune in the background.
You've got to overlay it when you do your editing of the podcast. The theme going through. Yeah, well, look, I love World War II history. I always have. And I think it's, for me, more relevant now than it ever has been. In terms of the rapid change. I mean, you talk about times in the world's history where the change was so quick, so dramatic.
Yes.
Technology was advancing. The closest parallel we have to now is the Second World War. And it's that I believe that we can take stories of leadership reacted or didn't react during World War II and transpose some of those lessons into what leaders should be doing now. And it's also, everyone wants to listen to a story about World War II more than they do the same rhetoric about how leadership should change in digital transformation. Right?
Sure.
So it's something that resonates. It allows me to bring my passion out. But the story, for those that are now going, which one is it? Which one is it? Is the story of The Great Escape. And the movie, if anyone hasn't seen it, it's Steve McQueen as Virgil Hilts, the Cooler King, and you've got Richard Attenborough as Big X.
And then it goes... That's the theme tune. So if you don't know it, then you need to go and kind of like find it out. And that's the last time I'm going to hum on this podcast.
Ever.
And it's the first and the last time, probably.
Well, actually, so the key thing about the story is, and you always think, I mean, another great love World War II movie is Escape to Victory, and I've never wanted to go and check if that's real because I don't believe it is, and I think my whole, I just would never watch the film again. So I want to believe it is, even though it isn't. But this one is actually based on a true story,
right? And
it's based on the particular character that it's based on is a guy called Squadron Leader Roger Bush. It was actually a South African, which is interesting, which is why it makes it interesting for me being in South Africa. I actually met the family. They're based here in the Western Cape. And I spoke to one of their family about the story and is it true? And they were able to share with me some of the letters that were written between Roger Bushell and his sister back in the UK. And it was fascinating. And the story is reasonably accurate, the one shown in the movie. For those that don't know, it's based on some airmen, Commonwealth airmen, that were caught, and they're in a prisoner of war camp. And it was North Compound, Stalingrad 3 in Nazi-occupied Poland at the time. And on the night of March 24th, 1944, you had 220 of these British and Commonwealth officers poised to escape by tunnel. It was going to be the biggest mass escape from a prisoner of war camp during World War II.
Yes.
And on that night, 72 men actually escaped. And now the key thing, and this is where the leadership stuff comes into, you need to understand the concept or the sort of context of trying to get this number of people in a prisoner of war camp that has over 1,000 prisoners to actually attempt an escape, because it was pretty hectic conditions at the time. You've got the Germans were fighting on three fronts. On the Eastern Front against the Russians, on the Western Front against the Allies. They knew at some point that the invasion across the Channel would take place.
Yes.
And everyone was poised for that. And then you also had in Africa.
Yes.
There was they were fighting on that front. So it was pretty harsh conditions. And to be honest, the Geneva Convention was probably being thrown out the window at this time because the Germans were so stretched. There was little tolerance for the Nazis to toe the line. So for the prisoners in that camp, a lot of horrible things were happening. It was easier to accept their fate, live in doubt, live in despair, become subservient. Let's see out the war. We know we're hearing that it's turning. The tide might be turning. Let's just see it out. It was a really hopeless situation.
Sure.
Something you can compare to a lot of companies now who are feeling the impact of the change of technology and feeling like they're getting left behind.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of their teams are feeling like they're in this hopeless situation, right? And they're feeling it's something that you wallow in, and it gets worse and worse. So as a leader, you have two choices.
Yeah.
Right? You can choose to say, guys, we can either sit here in this prisoner of war camp and we can see out this war and hope that we don't get shot.
Yeah.
Okay. So we can do that, but the likelihood is we're going to get shot. So we've got to dig our way out of here. Okay, because otherwise they're going to kill us. So you could sort of take that approach to getting people to try and escape, which is probably similar to what sales teams get told.
Yes.
If you don't make sales this month, you're going to lose your job. It's that burning platform approach. Okay, and Roger Bushell was a really smart leader. He knew that was only going to inspire them for a month, 2 months, 3 months. And he knew that things were never going to go as was expected.
Sure.
So he can't create a promise of something where people are then having to live with all the challenges that get hit at them as things go wrong. So what he really cleverly did, and this is one of the things that future fit leaders do, is he led with optimism in the direst of times.
Right.
He said to them, you guys here, we can still make a difference to the war effort. We can still make a difference to our families back home. And a lot of those airmen would have experienced that. They would have been back in, as they were going through their training, they would have known about the Blitz. They would have known that their families that were living in London or Coventry or wherever the industrial towns were being bombed. Okay, and they would have, that idea of still being able to affect the war and make a difference to the war back home. And more importantly, he said, make a difference to their families. Suddenly, you've got a connection.
Right.
Suddenly, you're aligning a bigger purpose with the individual's self-purpose, but in an optimistic way. You can still make a difference, guys. Now, rather than saying you're going to get shot.
Yes.
And what he did is he managed to get within the camp over 600 of those airmen as part of this attempt to escape. 600 of the 1,000. It's a phenomenon, and got them to buy into. I mean, you can imagine. There's actually a scene in the movie where they tell Steve McQueen, "We're going to take out 220 men," and Steve McQueen looks at them and goes, "220? Are you kidding? It's just unheard of." And
yes.
I think it was that way in which he positioned what they had to do, that leading with optimism, that allowed them to buy into it and to work together as a team towards it. So that was one of the things, and that gives you an example of how I use wartime stories to draw parallels, because they are so true, and it resonates with us today. And I go on with that story to talk about the importance of creating a picture of potential. It's not a vision. He told them, I've spoken about the war fighting on three fronts, and having to, if they escape, he then painted this picture that said, if we get out, they're going to have to pull people from the Eastern Front, from the Western Front, from Africa, because this is going to be the biggest PR disaster the Nazis have ever had.
Yes.
And it's going to affect, that's how we're going to affect the difference. That's how we're going to affect the change. That's how we're going to make a difference. But as he was saying it, he was talking about, we're going to have people on bikes, we're going to have people catching trains, we're going to have people going into Czechoslovakia over the Alps. We are just going to be spreading across the country, and you close your eyes and you can actually see it. And that's the other thing. That's the difference between, for an organization, a vision and a picture of potential. Because they say a lot nowadays, you've got to create a vision with a purpose. Well, actually, the idea of a purpose is that it resonates, that it's a motive.
Yes.
So my key thing to leaders, I say, is as you're telling someone your vision, can you close your eyes? Can they close their eyes, the team that's listening to you? And can they see it in their mind's eye? And can they start to feel it? So do they get that emotional wave over them that says, I want to buy into that.
Yeah.
So it's those sort of things. And we talk about in that story, there's great parallels about how he then changed structures. So, hierarchy structures, and he created structures of innovation in order to do that. And also he created learning cultures in the teams that had to then upskill on it. Might have been making suits as tailors for the people that escape, or for, the guys doing the maps.
Yes.
And the licensing. Actually, there's a great story about that. So he's creating this learning culture, and he's got all these teams that maybe had never forged before that are doing the forging. I think it's Donald Pleasant,
yes,
who plays that role, and he gets blind in the movie. But there's a great part of the real story, and they actually bring that into the movie, where they dug the tunnel, and they had to go, I think, 400 feet from under the hut to the woods in the distance, and they were, I think, 20 feet or 40 feet short of the woods, and they popped up in no man's land. And on one side they've got the woods, on the other side they've got the guard, the goon, as they called him.
Yes.
Not to be associated with Arsenal fans. I am a Spurs fan, and you can see the parallel, but I'm not going to go down there. That could open a complete rabbit's warren. You might have people unsubscribing from your podcast right now.
Yeah.
But you've got the goon that's there. But luckily, he's looking the other way. So he's looking into the camp. Now they've popped their head up. The other character, which is Steve McQueen's character, which is based on Flight Lieutenant Leslie Bull.
Uh-huh.
He's the one that pops his head up at the time, and he suddenly says, "Sugar, we're a little bit short here.
Uh-huh.
How do we do this?" So he goes back down and says, "We're short," and they have to make a decision at that point. Do they close off the top, dig the other 40 feet, and hope the weather conditions are right, that the moon again is low? They've got to wait for the next moon cycle. They've got to hope that the tunnel doesn't get found. Do they do that and then make sure they're escaping in the woods, which will give more chance of more people getting out? Or do they go tonight? And the deciding factor was that all the train tickets and all the ID documents that were given out when you get to a roadblock were all date stamped,
right,
for the following day or the following week.
Yeah.
And they couldn't, you would have to redo all that forgery, which would have been months and months and months of work. So they actually decided to go. So I know we'll talk about learning skills and everything, but I love these stories. And that gives an example of how important that those forgers were in the process.
Perfect. I think the thing that strikes me, so that just so I'm clear, so there was 4 things you brought. I was like, lead with optimism, paint a picture of potential, create structures of innovation, and then it's build a learning culture. Is that the 4 things?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right.
Lead with optimism, picture of potential, structures of innovation, and learning culture. It's the upskilling of the team. You've got to give equal resource, energy, time to your people's upskilling.
Yeah.
As you do this money on technology. And I see this. I talk to so many CIOs and CTOs who will they might put out Microsoft, expect people to use it, and they give them 1 day's training, and they give them a manual and go, right, you're done. Now we expect you to adopt this technology.
To be a master or a ninja on this kind of particular technology, and people are like going, what?
It doesn't work. And that's part of it. Yes, so it's those 4 things in this particular story.
Okay, so the interesting thing I found about the particularly the first 2, the lead with optimism and this picture of potential. Now, first of all, I think the thing that struck me about the lead with optimism, and the thing I really, really liked about that sort of idea, is that it almost it encourages but also demands leaders in organizations to be braver about what they're doing and what they think about and how they are going to try and sort of achieve. Because we've all seen the sort of the stats that are floating around, kind of, which say that was it 70% of all digital or CX or change or transformation programs of any kind of sort, almost 70%, if not more than that, fail to meet their objectives. They just fail to deliver.
Yeah.
And it almost kind of feels like, and that sort of confused by this idea that there's all sorts of people that are talking about all this sort of stuff, and everyone wants to lead and so on and so forth, but nobody's daring to do anything different, or daring to kind of to think bravely and to be a bit braver. But it requires that you have to lead with that optimism. You have to almost like go a bit further. I think it's a really nice way of positioning it, because it is a big challenge, right? It's
hard.
Yeah, because otherwise everybody becomes like we're like obsequious in our masses, right? We just a natural tendency is to follow the crowd rather than to kind of to step out on our own and be that person that's going, oh no, we're going to do something slightly different, slightly off the beaten track, or outside of what is the norm. But I think that whole thing around painting the picture of potential sort of underpins that, because otherwise it's just like, you can lead with optimism and somebody goes like, yeah, you're a crazy big thinker, but you're still crazy. But you've actually got to underpin it with that whole sort of, then here's how it's all going to work. So it has to be completely holistic, I guess, in many ways, and sort of completely knitted together. So it's almost like you can be optimistic, but you've got to build this compelling, sort of well knitted together, holistic sort of like kind of plan about how you're going to achieve that. And I think those are the two things that really stood out for me, as well as the sort of the structures of innovation and the learning culture, because that just underpins everything and it just enables it all. But so I really like those things, because it feels like, to me, somebody was asking me about one of the things what I thought was going to happen in sort of 2019 and what's going to technologies and trends and all that sort of stuff, which I sort of normally don't really like, because it's a lot of stuff doesn't really change. And they said, well, what do you think is going to happen? I said, well, I think the thing that I hope happens is we see people be more brave, because there's a lot of these programs are not delivering, and if we don't start delivering on some of these programs, and people don't start doing bigger and braver sort of things, and therefore taking kind of more risks, then there's a risk that all of this digital CX kind of transformation sort of stuff starts to teeter towards the edge of what is the top of the peak of inflated expectations, using kind of Gartner's hype cycle sort of terminology. And if we're going to get closer and closer to this precipitous fall into the trough of despair, or the trough of disillusionment, which is almost like where the CRM industry found itself about 20 years ago. Yeah. When it first emerged on the scene, everybody was like, wow, he's going to save the world. Yeah. And then everybody piled in, spent a whole bunch of money, and then didn't quite deliver to expectations. Everybody went, oh. And then got slightly bored of it, and then they had to chug away in the background and labour away to prove their case, and almost like to prove themselves. And it's only now that CRM is becoming this, is starting to realise its promise.
Yeah, realising its potential.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's what it's. It's interesting you mentioned about the leading with optimism. I agree that it is brave. It's not for me necessarily about big, hairy, audacious goals.
No, not at all.
It's not about it. It's a way of being, and it's actually a conscious decision. It's a conscious decision that needs to be made to say, as a leader, I am not going to behave in this way. I'm going to behave in this way. And if you were to ask, what is the single key thing that leaders can do in order to lead in a future fit way, to be successful, it's actually the requirement to self-reflect on themselves. Right. And through that self-reflection, to look at the key things that they need to be doing. So take, for example, lead with optimism. This is one of the exercises, and any of your listeners can do this, and it's a great thing to do with leadership teams. So I do this with leadership teams. Is when we're talking about leading with optimism, I have 3 flip chart sheets around a wall. Okay, and on one of the sheets we write cognitive, we write the mind. On the other we write somatic, the body, and on the other we write emotion, the heart. So it's the mind, the body, and the heart. Yes. And I get them to list down, if you lead with optimism, what happens to you as a leader in your mind? What happens to your team in their minds? And then on the body one, when you lead with optimism, what happens to your body? Do you become more? Do you stand taller? Does the pain go away? Do you feel? Can you breathe better? From the emotional perspective, the heart. If you lead with optimism, what happens to you as a leader? Do you get energized? You feel positive? And what happens to your team? And it's amazing. It's a great self-reflection, a start of a self-reflection process that goes. Everyone sits in there and goes, bloody hell! That's how I want to feel. That's how I.
Sure.
And so that is the key thing. Leading with optimism is one of those things, but it starts for all leaders with just starting to self-reflect. How do I show up in a room?
Yes.
And because that will dictate the path.
So I'm thinking. I'm really interested in all things sort of service and experience, engagement. Both from a customer and employee perspective. If I was to say to you, there are people listening to this and they are in that sort of space, and that's one of the primary things that they're thinking about is like, how do I deliver better service or better experience or engage people kind of more? And they're leaders in that sort of space, whether they're leading their own firm, kind of large organizations, or they're just leaders in their own sort of professional kind of area. What are the implications kind of for them in this, the story, the film, the Future Fit leadership? What are the things what does it mean for them? If they want to improve service, improve experience, improve engagement, kind of what does it mean?
Well, there's two broad things. I think that it's for them and probably other spaces, and then there's one specific thing that I think is so tied into the service industry. So from a broad level, if you can do this, you start to improve your capability to cope with change,
right?
Which is critical.
Yes.
Particularly in the customer service space, that change is coming hard and fast, and it's coming hard and fast, and they're at the forefront. They're the ones that get it before everyone else.
Yes.
Because the customers are changing, the customers' expectations are growing, and they need to react and respond to that. So if they cannot build the competency, the capability, the capacity to deal with change, they're going to be in trouble. Right. So that is a key part of becoming a future fit leader. And as part of that, and you've already mentioned it, if you can do it right, if you can lead with optimism, if you can set the purpose, get people behind that, you're going to mobilize your teams. And this is why it's broad. It's not just for the customer service, but it is something which you can't do this on your own. There is no more hero leadership. It very rarely works. We might see this hero figurehead for these large companies. But the ones that are truly succeeding are the ones that are building learning cultures, system cultures within their organizations, so that the drive can come from everywhere. So it causes that mobilization. My key point I think I would make for people within the customer service industry, whether it's customer experience, whether it's employee engagement, whether it's customer service, is I would ask you the question, how the hell can you go out there and really understand your customer and understand how your customer is feeling, how your customer reacts, how your customer responds, if you don't know that about yourself? So if you don't know how you react, how you respond as an individual in a particular moment, in a particular way, to particular situations, if you are not doing that self-reflection on yourself, how can you do it for the customers out there? Because it comes down to spreadsheets, and it comes down to KPIs, and that's all we focus on.
Sure.
So people in the industry, more than any other, because they are so in touch with people at the forefront, the customer themselves, they have to get in touch with their humanity. They have to understand how they feel, why they feel, because if they can't do it for themselves, they are going to be sitting there with spreadsheets telling them what to do, and they cannot, I would argue, they will struggle to really make that connection which is required at a higher level, and is going to be required at a much higher level going forward, because a lot of people talk about losing jobs, okay, and how a lot of customer service is going to be automated. I think it's the complete opposite. I think
Thank you.
I think the machines will come in and they will do the boring stuff. They will do the stuff that we as customer service people don't like doing, and it will allow people in the customer service industry to use what I believe we were made to do, or they were made to do, which is to get in touch with the true humanity of themselves again.
Yeah.
We've become machines. We've become machines in the 20th century. We have turned into Excel spreadsheets. How do we get rewarded for doing the task, for doing it more efficiently? We've turned into machines, and I don't want to do that anymore. I want to get back to what I was, or what we were as a people, what made us different up until the turn of the 20th century, and actually getting back to the connecting with people, being able to understand, to listen.
Yeah.
And I don't mean listen with our ears, but listen with our hearts.
Yes.
Listen with our eyes. All those things. That's what we have to do as customers, and that's what's making future fit leaders stand out more than anyone else.
Absolutely. Can I tell you what I'm completely with you, Mike, on this. And I don't know if you know this book reference, but I thought I'd share it with our listeners and readers as well, because a lot of the time when people talk about lead with optimism, sometimes some people might react to that and think, there's some people that are just so they're much more upbeat naturally, as it were. So the difference between they think about the optimism is related to sort of character and personality. And that can become a blocker or challenge for people. But do you know the book called Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman?
I know it, but I haven't read it.
Okay, so Martin, I love the guy. He's the father of the effectively positive psychology. He was like the first guy doing research into this, not the kind of happy clappy sort of like type of kind of positive psychology, but he's done work around the fact that optimism for some people is much easier than it is for others, but actually optimism is a thing that you can learn, and his book Learned Optimism sort of sets out to prove that and to show people how to do it. And so if you find that you want to build up your optimistic muscles, as it were, I would suggest anybody who's listening to go and check out that book. Sometimes in places it's a little bit dense, but it's actually quite approachable. And he's a good guy. If you need the proof, as it were, as many people do, there's the science that it can be done, and it's something that we can work on and we can get better at. And particularly if you're in a challenging time and fast changing sort of time, sometimes it's hard to be optimistic, but actually his work and his what he's doing proves that even in challenging circumstances that you can learn to take a more optimistic view. And if you're a leader, you have a responsibility to do that for not only just yourself, but also the people that are in your team and that you're responsible for.
150 million %. couldn't agree more. There's actually so go on.
No, I thought I'd just throw that in because I thought it's a good reference just to completely support what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's actually a great story. I'm going to give the gentleman's wrong name now, which is terrible. I can't remember it off the top of my head, and it's I think it's Hans Molderman.
Right.
Hans Molderman, I think. The guy was a Dutch traffic person. So he used to look at traffic flow. And he used to do this amazing thing where he would take all his students that he would teach, and he would go stand on the side of a highway, okay, close his eyes, and he would walk across a highway with his eyes closed. Okay? which sounds pretty insane. I mean, I wish my lecturers would have done that at university. But his theory was that, this idea of leading with optimism, and it is a state of mind, is always reflecting the fact that we as human beings are connected. And that was what he was trying to prove.
Right.
Is that he walked across with the belief that we have this connection as human beings, as such that we will move out the way for each other, and we can understand each other, and we can adjust and adapt. Basically, we don't need to necessarily talk to each other. It's there in our humanity. Now, he was doing it in quite a drastic way, but it went further to prove. And what he did was he started to, in places around the world, start to adopt traffic which didn't have any road lines.
Right.
In the trust that people would know what to do. We just trust people, and we trust that people can engage with each other based on their core base humanity. and that idea of connection. So I'd say there is scientific proof out there now, which is saying we're connected. We can use that. So for those that are struggling in that optimism space, go and read up some stuff about this stuff. There's some, if you're working in the mind space and you need to be convinced in the mind rather than the heart and the body, there's stuff out there that can help you to do that.
Fantastic.
Like this book that you mentioned.
Absolutely. So that's all great, but if I was to say to you, Mike, I tell you what, let's boil it down to brass tacks. People are always kind of really interested in, you can go, do this, do that, be more like this, kind of add more of that, think more this way, etc., etc. And people are like, go, brilliant. Now, what's my first step? Where do I start? Kind of. So if I would say to you, they want to do this, but what's the first thing they should do?
Okay, so I'm going to repeat myself here a little bit. So I'm going to give you a practical thing, and I'm going to give. Well, both are practical.
Yeah.
But the first thing you need to do is start to set up habits of self-reflection.
Okay.
You have to start.
So boil that down, Mike. What does that actually mean? Because people are like, self-reflection, does that mean I just sit quiet, drinking a cup of coffee, kind of like on a Sunday morning sort of thing, or what does that mean?
It can do, and for me, it does.
Right.
For me, it's a meditation practice. For other people, it's a walk. But in order to make it most effective, there needs to be some kind of education on the base. So it's not your normal meditation where you sit still and you just let your thoughts go across your mind. I mean, you're sitting still in order to listen to your body, but around a particular topic. So at that point, the other thing they need to be doing is they need to educate themselves on what makes, for me, and obviously I sell Future Fit, so it's educating yourself around what it means to be a future fit leader. Then you've got those things to reflect on. If you want something more practical, I've got a business, Mike, I need to go and start and do something tomorrow.
Yeah.
I would say, before you do anything else, work on your picture of potential.
Right.
Start to craft that. Where are you going? How are you going to tell that story? Because a picture of potential, if it resonates, it's got to be told through a story. Do that. That's a practical thing to go away tomorrow and start with your team, not on your own, with your team.
Super. That's perfect. Thank you very much for that. So, Mike, before kind of we end, we just looking at time and things before we kind of wrap this up. I mean, anything else that you'd like to share before we kind of wrap things up? Anything we've missed out?
No, it's more to ask you the question, what the weather's like over there at the moment, because I'm coming over in a week's time and I can't wait to sort of get there. But if I'm coming to minus 30 degrees and snow, I might think twice.
Well, kind of today, currently, it's kind of sunny with blue skies down here on the coast in Brighton. But yesterday, it was lashing it down with rain. So mixed is the summary.
So no change there then.
No,
England hasn't changed while I've been away.
Absolutely. So, Mike, just want to say thank you for that. I think it's some really interesting ideas. I love the way that you're combining your passion and interest of World War II history and kind of the story and film and stuff to bring all this sort of stuff to life, because I think that's where it really makes sense, because then people can actually go and watch The Great Escape with a completely different kind of lens kind of now, I believe.
Yeah.
And so thank you for that. Thank you for saving your time. I mean, people that are listening in, if you want to find out more and check out more about what Mike is doing, then check out the website, which is wwc.co.za. I'll make sure I link that up in the notes and things afterwards. But Mike, just want to say thank you so much for your time and sharing your insight with us today. That has been most splendid. My pleasure. I love talking about this. We could have gone on. Keep on talking, but I love it. So thank you for inviting me. You're welcome.
Well, that's it for another interview. I really hope you enjoyed it. Now, every time I complete one of these interviews, I learn something new, and I try and incorporate that new learning into my writing, my speaking, my workshops, and the consulting that I do for my clients. If you're interested, you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinsko.com. But one final thing before I go. Please consider heading over to iTunes or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do listen in again. All the very best.